Looking down at the US from space, what are the most interesting geographic features? But not including the Rocky Mountains or the Great Lakes. Who needs a YouTube video on those? For number 5, we head to the Appalachians. But not these large ridges. Actually, the area just to the west, which makes up almost all of West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. If you're like me, you think of a state like West Virginia, the mountain state, to have these large ridges and valleys. Actually, the ridge and valley terrain is a relatively narrow strip. Instead, the geography is dominated by what's called the Appalachian Plateau, made extremely rugged over many hundreds of millions of years of erosion. You can just see how isolated people living here are from the rest of society. For number 4, we go to a pattern of disconnected mountain ridges in the southwest. Geologist Clarence Dutton described them as an army of caterpillars crawling northward. This area is at the center of what's called the Great Basin. Primarily bound by the Sierra Nevada and Wasatch Mountains, water has no outlet to the ocean, but drains in a few places like the Great Salt Lake. Usually, mountains are in long ranges, so what's up with these? Apparently, a thinning and stretching of the Earth's crust 17 million years ago, called tectonic extension, is responsible. In third place, the Mississippi River alluvial plain. From space, it looks like part of the Midwest just plunges down into the south. Sure enough, it's agriculture and cropland, like most of the Midwest, producing most of the U.S.'s rice, cotton, and catfish, apparently. On the right here is a land cover map. Brown means cultivated crops, and green shades are different types of forest. The rest of the South is pretty much forest dominated. Alluvial plains are flat areas of sediment deposits from a river, basically the area around the river that has flooded at some point. It's like Civilization 6, where your soil fertility increases after a river floods. The Mississippi River alluvial plain stretches 500 miles from Missouri down to the Mississippi Delta, and it's over 100 miles across at many sections of the plain. In second place, the Chesapeake Bay. This is an estuary, a tidal, semi-enclosed body of water where a river mixes with the sea. The main river is the Susquehanna, but the watershed covers a huge area with many rivers. Now, the largest estuary in the world is the St. Lawrence estuary, but while it's larger in area, you can see a much smoother shoreline. Contrast this with the Chesapeake Bay, which is over 11,000 miles long. As a straight line, it would pass the St. Lawrence estuary and across the Eurasian landmass all the way into the Indian Ocean. As an estuary, the water is brackish, but the further inland you go, the fresher the water gets, and it's much saltier in the region by the mouth. The bay's max depth is 174 feet. The blue areas in this map show the deepest parts, and the average is only 21 feet, with a fourth of the bay having a depth less than 6 feet. This means it doesn't store heat very well, and the water temperature gets down to 34 degrees in the winter, which is 10 degrees colder than nearby Virginia Beach on the Atlantic. In first place, we have the Pacific Northwest rain shadow. This dramatically abrupt ecological change is highly noticeable from space as the lush forests of western Washington and Oregon meet the steppes of the Columbia Plateau. Zooming in just south of Mount Hood in Oregon, we find a stretch of road where a mere 5 miles separates green forest of the Cascades foothills from dry grassland. Here's a street view of the forest compared to the street view of the plateau. This graphic basically shows that the Olympics and Cascades take most of the precipitation out of the air before it arrives to the east, thankfully facilitating some excellent wines. Here's a map of historical precipitation in Washington. The purple over in the Olympic Peninsula is the Hoh rainforest. Looking at the barren landscape to the east, I honestly wonder if there is anywhere else on Earth with this abrupt of a change. Let me know. And here's a historical map showing a similar pattern in Oregon. Looking back at the whole region, we see the Columbia Plateau stretches almost 200 miles from this point in Washington. Interestingly, past the Columbia Plateau looks like a resumption of the wet part of the Pacific Northwest. Apparently, this dry air, which was warmed from the lower elevations in the Columbia Basin, begins to take on moisture again from rivers and lakes, as well as weather systems from the north. So in the northern Rockies in Idaho and western Montana, we see similar terrain and vegetation as the Cascades. Well, I hope you enjoyed my top 5 most interesting geographical features of the continental U.S. Let me know your top 5 in the comments.